Welcome here to the FWA review from Craven Cottage, where I'm delighted to be joined by the Telegraph's chief football correspondent Jason Burt as we look back on a conundrum of captivating comebacks. What a weekend!
It was a fantastic weekend, wasn't it? Both in the Premier League and the FA Cup. And we're both here at Craven Cottage. We saw a very dramatic game with Liverpool almost throwing it away.
Which no one expected.
No one expected a mistake by Virgil van Dijk either. We haven't seen many of those this season, and we almost thought that Ryan Babel would be the story, scoring against his former club, but Liverpool got over the line in the end with a penalty.
We'll go back to that one later, but the draw has really opened up now for Pep Guardiola and the FA Cup as they go for that quadruple. What do you make of the cup draw?
Well, it's obviously quite an interesting one with Wolves playing Watford and City against Brighton. It looked like it was going to be Millwall at one stage, but certainly you'd have thought it's opened up for Manchester City with Manchester United being knocked out. But yesterday's game at Swansea, I thought Swansea were desperately unlucky, really, and obviously opened up the whole debate over VAR.
It's the huge talking point, and you went down and spoke to Daniel James ahead of this match this week, and he was sensational. So with that in mind, with such young talent like that really shining, setting up the opening goal, how much worse does that VAR decision make it?
I thought it was desperately cruel. I mean, I'm a big fan of VAR. I think most people are. We support it. There's no reason why it wasn't at that game. Swansea were a Premier League club last season. The FA is saying, well, we only want the VAR used in the Premier League grounds for the FA Cup. It's just such an imbalance, really. I think when there is a game where obviously just affecting two teams, you could argue that, OK, they're the only teams affected by the result. But Swansea was so unlucky, not just with the penalty, I think, with Sterling, but also with the offside goal from Aguero. They were brilliant last night, and it felt a little bit like they were robbed.
Everyone's felt very queasy about this. Everyone I've spoken to in the press room, everyone in football, about it just not being a level playing field. And that's the beauty of the game. It's 11 men against 11 men, or 11 women against 11 women. It's the rules of association football. How did this happen?
Well, as I say, the FA made the decision that they'd only have VAR in Premier League stadia, and it's just a bit weird because, OK, fair enough, if you go into the League 2 or League 1 ground, they haven't got the facilities, but Swans were in the Premier League last season. There's no reason with a quarter-final of the FA Cup, we've only got 4 matches, they couldn't install VAR for that game. And as I say, those goals wouldn't have counted. It would have been a completely different result. Maybe Man City, actually, to be fair to them, would have gone on and got something out of it, but it just felt like Swansea were robbed to me.
Also, games are televised at all those grounds. Cameras are there.
Yeah, absolutely. The TV companies can afford to help put in those cameras and the cost of those cameras for those games. But it's a game that's been around the world and it's caused a lot of embarrassment, really, hasn't it, for the FA? Because, as I say, they made that decision and it's come back to bite them.
No one comfortable with it at all. Shocking, the headline in the Mail. We've got to look to Wolves. And I do want to say Wolves. I really want to focus on Wolves because too often we do move on too quickly, don't we? And that was a big performance, not an upset either.
No, fully deserved, actually. They've been fantastic this season back in the Premier League. I think most of us feel they've probably been the best team outside the top 6, notwithstanding Watford doing very well this season. But the way they've attacked coming back into the Premier League has been fantastic. They've got some great players and they fully deserved that win. Obviously, I think it was one of those games that exposed some of Manchester United's limitations. I mean, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has done brilliantly with them, but I think we saw last night that they're going to struggle a little bit to get where they want to be this season, and obviously top 4 finish is their main priority now.
They've already taken points off Manchester City. People will be looking ahead and seeing that as the final, won't they?
Yeah, I think so, but I think Watford, I wouldn't rule out Watford. You know, I was actually there yesterday as well. They beat Palace. It wasn't the greatest game, but they're a strong team. They're a very, very strong team, and they actually won at Molineux earlier in the season, so they've done well against Wolves, so they'll fancy their chance as well.
Brighton as well. Chris Hughton calling it a proper FA Cup match. A goalkeeping error that really helped them through all the way to then get back into penalties. How do you size up that encounter? It's going to be a tough one for them to get over the line against City, isn't it?
It is, but I think they really would have been kicking themselves if they hadn't got through that game against Millwall. Obviously, they were 2-0 down. It looked like it was going to be a big upset again. Millwall, as we know, have done really well in the cup competitions, but Brighton kept going and got themselves back into it.
Liverpool now back to the top of the Premier League.
Yeah, they had to win today. Obviously, they beat Fulham. I think if they'd gone into the international break, having dropped more points, I think the angst around that would have been terrible for them. They've really been in fretful sort of occasion. But no, they won, and they're not playing brilliantly, but they're getting over the line, and the games are running out now. They've only got 7 more matches to play. They'll believe they're obviously in this title race right to the end now, and I think they probably are.
I mean, no disrespect to Fulham because they really came into this game, but how kindly that fixture fell right after a gruelling and a sensational match in Munich.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Liverpool's next opponent is Tottenham Hotspur. They'd like obviously the fact that they played Fulham before they played Tottenham, as you say. Fulham aren't in great shape. I think Scott Parker's done a really good job actually so far. He hasn't won a game, hasn't taken a point, but they look better organised for sure. But they are at the bottom of the league or near the bottom of the league for a reason. They make far too many mistakes. They gave away those goals today and they shouldn't really have lost that game.
And Virgil van Dijk, officially his first Premier League mistake for Liverpool, leading to a goal, blotting his copybook. He said to me just in the tunnel a little earlier that he's going to have a word with Ryan Babel because he's angry with him, jokingly, on the plane out on the international duty. But that sums up the man, doesn't it? That the one mistake really wasn't his at all.
No, not at all. And he deals with these things really, really well. He's obviously very good when he talks to the media. He's got an awful lot of confidence and assuredness. You can see how that in his play, but also in the way he handles himself. There was a good interview by Alison Rudd in the Times yesterday with Ryan Babel in which he said, I know what Van Dijk's weaknesses is, but we didn't expect it to be that. We didn't expect it to be an error like that, and obviously gifting Fulham a goal.
Yeah, it was Alison Rudd's interview that I was picking up on, and we were watching for the first encounter with them, and it remarkably came in a goal. We also have to look at Manchester City. When we're looking at the FWA Player of the Year now, is Sterling really putting himself as the main man for Manchester City should they win the title? I
think he is, yeah. I think it's a good shout. I think the only other candidate from City is probably Bernardo Silva, but I think Sterling really does deserve to be in the running. He had a fantastic season, really maturing into a great player, not just a good player for his club and for his country.
And no surprise that John Cross with the story that Real Madrid have their eye on him, as well as of course De Gea.
Yeah, he's still only 24. I think it'll take a heck of a bid to get him out of City. I'm sure they'll put up a hell of a fight to keep him. I'd find that hard to see that move happening, I've got to say, but it doesn't surprise me they're interested.
And now all the players dashing out of here to go on to international duty, and for England the big story, Declan Rice.
Yes, absolutely. Fully deserves his call up. Obviously a little bit of controversy around it, switching allegiances from Ireland. It'll be interesting to see what happens this week. I expect him to talk to the media. He'll obviously give his reasons for doing that, because I think the FA have, in their new era of openness, been far more willing to engage with us on things like that, and that is the story around this call-up, obviously, around this international get-together. So they'll be best to deal with it straight away and see what he has to say for himself.
He handled that impeccably, though, didn't he? So I have no concern putting him up in front of the media on that England.
No, the statement he released when he made a decision was very mature, very well argued, and very reasonable. And I think that anyone could see that he was torn, conflicted, as I think a lot of players are nowadays. I think that's an interesting theme around international call-ups. Players have more and more options. They can play for more than one country, and we've got to respect that. And I think the way he sort of handled it was very good. And what I hear about him from West Ham, he's a very mature young guy. They see him as a future captain for them, and you can see the way he's burst onto the scene and done so well from this season that he's only going to get better.
And you speak to former England internationals and you ask who he can play with and who he'll link up with, and they'll say anyone. The versatility of him. Yeah,
absolutely. And he's playing as a holding midfielder for West Ham, but some people see his future as a centre half. But obviously it's good to have somebody who can play in those number of roles. And with England, there are opportunities there. We've got that issue in the central midfield. Possibly Jordan Henderson won't be available, maybe injured. But even then, you could argue that Declan Rice deserves his chance.
Interesting that everyone, having seen Gareth Southgate be so brave with youth and name so many young players, that it's quite a conservative, stable call-up this time. Are you surprised? Are there a few more you would have liked to have seen a run out?
No, I think I spoke to the FA about this before the squad was announced, and I think their reasoning was that there's two competitive fixtures now. They're playing the Czech Republic and they're playing Montenegro. Usually at this sort of time of year you get one competitive fixture, one friendly. It gives the opportunity to bring in some younger players. So I think they've thought, no, we'll go for experience now, because they've got to qualify for this tournament. Obviously they've done well in the Nations League. They can't not be at Euro 2020, so I can understand why he's done it. I think a couple of players are probably a little bit fortunate to be in there, and I think their futures may not be in the squad for too much longer if they don't pick up their club form. Kieran Trippier, James Tarkowski, players like that. But I can see why Southgate's gone for experience now.
And the story that Sam Wallace has been talking about today, I'm really doing well with the papers, the 48 team World Cup. Sam Wallace saying FIFA proving they'll do anything for money. This, as much as we talked about being uneasy about the FA Cup not having VAR, no one seems to want this to happen bar FIFA.
No, 48 teams is quite daunting. I mean, obviously we all want to go to as many football matches as possible and have as many big games to go to, but 48 teams for a World Cup's so unwieldy. I mean, it feels like it's virtually everyone will qualify for it.
And it's so navel gazing of us from England when our teams frequently qualify for major tournaments. Of course, there are nations that want to come through. But I looked at all the ball-playing major World Cups, cricket, rugby league, rugby union. No one goes above 32. Many are lower, 26, 20. It's unprecedented and it's unwieldy.
Well, it's got to be a money-making exercise as we let's cut to the chase. That's what it's all about with FIFA. 48 is too many. It's a finals, so therefore you have to qualify to get to the finals. This is one to be. If it goes to 48, it'll be harder not to qualify than to be there. And some countries will play so few games anyway. There'll only be a couple of games and they'll be out. So it's impossible to sort of see it happening in a sort of way that's viable. And again, you obviously talk about the possibility of it being held in more than one country now.
Is an option to broach the extremes of that number from the 32 a repechage? They do that with the emerging nations in the rugby. It ends up in a round robin playoff before they take the World Cup places. That 4 more places, 2 more places. It's 48.
I think we've gone as high as we should have gone anyway. Really, with 32, I think that's probably the absolute maximum. I don't think there's any real reason to go any higher. We have playoffs and so on to qualify. I really think it's become a FIFA corporate exercise in making more money for them and expanding it beyond any sort of reasonable way of running a competition.
And looking ahead to this Premier League season, is it any clearer to you who can really win the Premier League title? Is it all going to come down to the depth of squad? What's
interesting is obviously you have a game like Fulham against Liverpool and you think, well, that's going to be a very comfortable win for Liverpool, but it's often in these title races, it's a game like this where teams do slip up. So you look at the fixtures left and you think Liverpool haven't got too many difficult games. They've got Tottenham, they've got Chelsea, City have got the Manchester derby, but it might just be one of the other type of games that they slip up in. And obviously yesterday we saw Swansea almost had an upset with Manchester City, so I think it will be incredibly close. It probably will go all the way. I think Liverpool are showing some stickability, but I think it could be 1 or 2 points in it, and it probably will be somewhere you don't expect them to slip up, that one of those two teams will slip up.
And very quickly, there's so much. The Champions League, you wrote a lovely article about how the English teams really are now prioritising this and coming into the field of dominance. Do you think one of them?
Yeah, well, maybe it felt a bit like a Brexit article, and I've got castigated for that. But what I meant was actually there's so much money in the Premier League that surely they were going to get it right at some stage, because you talk to some of the big European clubs, and that's what they feel had to happen eventually. And it does feel a little bit like this year is the year where you look at the managers in charge of these Premier League clubs like Klopp and Guardiola, and the money they spent and the players they brought in, the 4 teams in the quarterfinals. You think surely now they're starting to get it right, and I think that is causing a little bit of fear around the rest of Europe. Obviously, you'd still say Barcelona, possibly Juventus are the favourites along with Manchester City. But the fact that 4 English teams are in the last 8, and obviously 2 in the quarterfinals of the Europa League, does show the strength of the Premier League.
And quickly, it's now been confirmed by Tottenham that the first match will be against Crystal Palace at White Hart Lane. So it means the team will have had a bit of time to get used to it. Could that be a big advantage for them against Manchester City?
I don't know. It's a really good question. I think we're all going to be so fascinated by that game. And the new stadium is going to be amazing. Does it give them the lift? Quite possibly so. I'm not one of those who's against them going there quickly. I think some people say, they should stay at Wembley for the rest of the season now. I think they've done everything they can to try and get into that stadium as quickly as possible, give them the opportunity to do that. But it's a very good question, because it could go either way. It could be a completely new stadium and they might struggle there, as teams often do, or it could give them a big lift. I think it's going to be a fascinating extra dimension to the Champions League.
And so, can you sum up this weekend in one word?
It's the same with every weekend: extraordinary.
Extraordinary certainly is. Stay across everything from the Football Writers Association at footballwriters.co.uk. Thanks for your time.